Everybody good? I have no idea. No. Press is good? Is everybody good? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. Everybody's good? Good. Ladies and gentlemen, the program will begin in 2 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please take your seats? The program will begin in 2 minutes. Thank you.
I'm Nia Malika Henderson. This is On Background. Police say one gunman is dead and possibly 2 others are at large in a shooting at the Washington Navy Yard this morning. The Washington Post reports at least 4 others are dead on the scene, and the injured or have been taken to area hospitals will have the latest. Columbine principal Frank DeAngelis vowed to see the kindergarten class of 1999 through to graduation, now entering his final year. DeAngelis gives us unique perspective on keeping kids safe in school, and this week marks the 5th anniversary of the financial crisis, and the middle class is still searching for its recovery. We'll talk to an economist who says things might get worse. He is author Tyler Cohen. It's time to go on Background. watching developments here in D.C. following a shooting at the Washington Navy Yard. Details are still emerging, but we know that at least 4 people have been killed, multiple people have been shot, and Metropolitan Police Chief Kathy Lanier says 1 gunman is dead. Michelle Borstein is live on the scene, and she joins me now on the phone. Michelle, give us the latest. What do we now know? We know that Kathy Lanier has come out and said that there could be other gunmen who are on the loose.
Well, I'm actually in an area where I don't have access to some of the details that you might have access to, but I can tell you that there's a lot of employees who are outside the area of the Navy Yard where there's thousands of people who work. It's also right next to a residential neighborhood and also very close to the Capitol. So there's a lot of roads locked down and schools in the area locked down and employees just kind of standing around waiting to hear if, their colleagues are still in the building, if people are getting out, rumors about how many people were hurt, how many shooters there were. It seems like the details of what's going on inside there even now are just coming out slowly. I just interviewed a Navy commander who described a really scary scene of himself running over a fence and trying to escape from a shooter, and not knowing where the shooter was standing, not knowing where the bullets were coming from, and another colleague approaching him to let him know to evacuate, and then seeing that person shot in the head in front of him. So it's I think people are just confused and trying to figure out how somebody could have gotten in the building, with the weapon and all that.
Right, and this is a place, the Naval Sea Systems Command Headquarters. This is a building where about 3,000 people work each day.
Yeah, I'm not sure if 3,000 people work in that building or they might work on the complex of the Navy Yard. It's basically several blocks that are on the Anacostia River, adjacent to the downtown and adjacent to Capitol Hill, and it's a whole network of large buildings, including the building where the shooting happened. So it's basically an area that's pretty sleepy at night, and then in the morning just filled with people coming in to go to work.
And everything started this morning, really at the top of the hour, 8:05, 8:10 or so this morning.
Yeah, it was right when people were coming to work. Lots of the people that we were interviewing this morning, were describing, getting off the bus and walking across the parking lot after parking their car and that kind of thing. It was right when people were getting to work. And the commander that I spoke with, who was telling me that story, was talking about people just having their coffee and in their cubicles in the morning, and then just people tearing down the, rows of cubicles telling them to evacuate. So it was at a, kind of a disorienting time. It's actually also in an area of Washington that's very crowded with highways and highway exits and that kind of thing. So it was a lot of traffic as well.
Kathleen Lanier said that people with information should call 202-727-9099. It seems at this point that there could be something of an active manhunt still going on.
Yeah, it's, where I am, I could hear over the loudspeakers where I am, which is outside of the compound. It's basically a bunch of office buildings that are behind a kind of a fence where people work. And you could hear loudspeakers telling people, just recently to, take shelter and don't leave the building unless they were informed to. It wasn't clear if it was over loudspeakers, and it wasn't clear if that was just for people on the base, if it was people in the neighborhood. But there's a lot of people just walking around, reporters and people who live in the neighborhood and police and that kind of thing. So I don't have the sense that they feel that the neighborhood is unsafe, although some of the schools are in lockdown right around me. So I'm not clear on that point. There's definitely people walking around the street, but only people who need to be here for work.
Michelle Borstein, thank you so much for joining us today, for your reporting, and you stay safe out there.
Thank you.
The scene at the Navy Yard is all too familiar for Columbine principal Frank DeAngelis. On April 20th, 1999, he stared down one of the 2 students on a shooting rampage through his high school. DeAngelis escaped that day physically unharmed, but the emotional weight of the day has never left him. His leadership and courage over the last 14 years has won him national recognition. The school's principal remained not only an anchor of hope in his own school community, but in other communities plagued by similar violence in years since. Frank, he joins me now. Thanks so much, Frank, for being here today. I wonder, for you, on days like this, it must be especially tough for you and bring back terrible memories of that day in 1999.
It does. I think anyone who was here on the 20th, it does. There are certain things that re-trigger or re-traumatizes things, and you hear about it. And even though it may not necessarily be a school situation, but what happened on 9/11, what happened last summer in the Aurora Theater shootings, that you have these feelings that are brought up, and it just sets you off. And for many of us that go through post-traumatic stress disorder, it's something that we have learned to cope with and live with, but it's very difficult hearing things such as what happened this morning.
And what's going to happen with these folks who have seen such violence visited upon their workplace? At some point, they will have to make the decision to return to that workplace as you did. How were you able to do that?
There's a couple of things that helped me. My mom worked for a chiropractor who was a Vietnam veteran. And one of the things that he shared with me within 24 hours of the tragedy at Columbine High School is he said, you're going to be pulled in so many different directions, your students, your staff, the community members. There's going to be so much that you're going to be asked to do. But if you don't help yourself, you can't help others. And so I immediately got into some counseling to give me the coping skills that would allow me to continue. And it's not that it ever ends. Just recently, less than a year ago, when the tragedy occurred at Sandy Hook, once again, I started experiencing some of these symptoms that I knew were drawing back upon what I experienced on April 20th. So I called my counselor for maintenance. That has been a key point. Something else that worked for me is I'm a person of faith. And those are the two things that allow me to continue in this position almost 15 years after our tragedy.
And one of the things you've talked about is certainly there is an emphasis on gun safety, but there should also be a focus on mental health as well in these school situations, in thinking about kids who might be on the fringes or on the fray.
Most definitely. And I think the first place that people go whenever there is a shooting is people want to talk about gun controls laws and stricter laws and things of that nature. And that's a point of discussion for politicians and other people involved in that situation. But we cannot eliminate some of the money. Additional money needs to be spent on identifying these kids, or these people need to be proactive. As I stated on numerous occasions, the two murders at Columbine High School did not come out of their mother's womb hating. What happened from the time they were born to the time that they carried out that horrific act on April 20th? And so we need to make sure that there are places that can identify kids that need additional help. It's got to be a situation in which the schools are involved, law enforcement agencies, judicial systems, our politicians. And I know with the economy, with budget shortfalls and things of that nature, we cannot we cannot lose that money to help these kids being identified. Not only identifying, and once they're identified, what programs are there to help the kids. I can't tell you the number of parents that call that are crying out for help for their kids to get them help, and there's not places for them to go.
Talking to Frank DeAngelis, who was the principal at Columbine High School on that fateful day in April of 1999. If you look at violent deaths at school, they've actually plummeted over the last many years, and so that's some good news. And they consider violence in schools, it's defined by homicide, suicide, or legal intervention in which a fatal injury occurs on campus. But on the flip side of that, you have parents, right, who are very much concerned with the incidence of violence in schools. It was at an all-time high of 55%. It's about 33% now. What's your message to parents as they send their kids off to school? We hear, talk about arming teachers or giving kids bulletproof backpacks.
Well, I think what we need to do is, when people ask me, what are you going to do as a school? I said, what are we going to do as a society? And we need to give people those skills. Things that we're dealing with now, almost 15 years after the tragedy, were not as prevalent during that particular time. There are ways in which students are communicating and making threats through social networking,
so-called cyberbullying and things like that.
Definitely. That is something when 15 years ago, there were warning signs, but it was not necessarily through the cyberbullying. And so one of the things that I tell parents is be parents. You need to know what is in your child's in their bedrooms. When parents tell me I'm invading their privacy, I said that's your right as a parent. A lot of these kids that are active on Facebook and postings there, are parents aware of what their child is doing on Facebook and other means in which they're involved in social networking? That is so important. And you bring up a brilliant point. We hear about the unfortunate shootings at Sandy Hook and what happened this morning in Washington, D.C. But what we do not know is many of them that have these plans that have been foiled because of some of the things that we have in place, because of lessons learned from Columbine and Chardon and Virginia Tech and Sandy Hook.
And you made the very conscious decision to stay on. You wanted to see the class of 1999 graduate. Why did you make that decision to sort of delay your retirement until the end of this year?
It goes back to my faith. On that horrific day, when I came out of my classroom, my worst nightmare became a reality, that I ran right into the gunfire. And fortunately, I was able to get some girls and myself to safety. They were going to head right into the crossfire. And as I ran to an area and got us all to safety, the gunman did not pursue me. What I found out later is my dear friend Dave Sanders came up the staircase about the same time I was coming out of my office, and they diverted from me and went after Dave Sanders. And unfortunately, he gave up the ultimate sacrifice, his life. And needless to say, anyone that survives a tragedy, there's a lot of survivor's guilt. And going back to my faith, when I talked to the pastor at my church, he said, Frank, there was a reason that you were spared. Now you need to go back and rebuild that community. And there was no question in my mind, is that something that I had to do? And so looking back upon it, the kids that were in preschool on that particular day actually graduated in 2012, and I'm still here. So when I leave in June, it'll be 15 years. The students that we have in Columbine right now were 3 years old. I just feel that our community is strong. We'll never forget what happened on the 20th, but I think we've built a foundation for us to move forward, a time to remember, and also a time to hope.
Frank DeAngelis from Columbine High School joins me today. I want to talk a bit more about rebuilding that community. I mean, what do you do from day one if you are these folks who are dealing with this horrific tragedy that has unfolded today here in D.C.? What do you do on day one? Is it something that happens organically, rebuilding the community? Does it have to be sort of institutionalized? Someone is in charge of doing that? I mean, what's your sense?
First of all, there's a couple of things. As someone told me, it's a marathon and not a sprint. And then the next question that'll be asked, when will it get back to normal? And what I have told people on numerous occasions, number one, it never gets back to normal. You have to redefine what normal is. Just like after every horrific event, whether it be 9/11, we are doing things differently as far as security through airports. Schools are doing things differently as a result. And so you learn from those lessons. But if I think people are deceiving themselves, if they feel one morning you're going to wake up and things are going to be back to normal. So I think that's important. But the most important thing to realize is you're not in this alone. And one of the things that allowed us to continue as a community is we brought people together that one by one, it was like a ripple effect, throwing a rock into a lake. There's that ripple effect. And we brought parents and community members and politicians and everyone involved for a common cause to provide an environment that is violent free. But to say that it's going to be easy, no, there were tough times. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is you end up taking 3 steps forward and then something happens and you have to go backwards, but you can't give up hope. And the one thing that helped me is not allowing negativity to enter my life.
Frank DeAngelis, thank you so much. I want to congratulate you on being the Colorado High School Principal of the Year. You are one of the 3 finalists. You'll be here in D.C., 3 finalists for National High School Principal of the Year. Congratulations on that honor. Good luck, sir. I thank you for your courage and your insight today.
Thank you, and my thoughts and prayers out to your area out there. Thank you.
Take good care. And now we turn to the middle class and income inequality that makes the American dream seem more elusive than ever. Here's President Obama speaking with George Stephanopoulos on Sunday.
If you look at the data, a couple of things are creating these trends. Number one, globalization, right? Capital, companies, they can move businesses and jobs anywhere they want. And so they're looking for the lowest wages. That squeezes workers here in the United States, even if corporations are profitable. Technology. If you go to a lot of companies now, they've eliminated entire occupations because they're now robotized. We don't have travel agents. We don't have bank tellers.
It's bigger than Washington.
Right. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's happening in the marketplace.
5 years after the economy crashed, things are right back on track for the top 1%. For everyone else, unemployment remains high, wages are basically stagnant, and finances are fragile, but all may not be lost. Author and economist Tyler Cohen has written a new book called Average is Over, Powering America Beyond the Age of the Great Stagnation. He's here today to talk about who can thrive in the new economy and who may simply need to redefine the word happiness. Tyler, thank you so much for being here. I've got the book here, and I was reading a bit of it last night. What do you mean? The central thesis, right, and the title is Average is Over. What do you mean by that?
This is a book about increasing inequality, and in the future, who will do well and who will do not so well. It's not trying to argue for politics or judge who deserves to do well, but it's a kind of roadmap to where we're headed in the American economy.
And I mean, if you look at the numbers here, we'll put a chart up here from 2009 to 2012. The top 1% saw its income rise more than 30%. The bottom 99% saw its income rise 0.4%. In 2012, the top 1% captured 95% of the income growth. One of the arguments you make in this book is that the 1% will become the 15%.
I think we're headed toward an America where 15 to 20% of the people will have lives like those of millionaires or maybe better, and you'll see wage stagnation for a lot of other income classes. So inequality will go up. It will be a strange and different world, actually. There'll be a lot more free stuff over the internet. There'll be a lot more innovation all of a sudden.
Free stuff like education, right?
That's
It'll be
right.
sort of a...
There'll be free education, but
Right.
how many people will actually be in a good position to take advantage of that? We don't know yet. We'll have driverless cars, and we'll have free medical diagnosis by computer. That will be great, but there'll be more globalization, there'll be more automation, and a lot of jobs, I think, will have somewhat lower wages.
And that middle class will be hollowed out because of that increased automation. The other thing you say is computers will be central to this new society, and it won't be the people who are just good at computers, it'll be the people who also are sort of good at reading what people want and understanding people.
People who know how to market through computers. So Mark Zuckerberg, of course he was a tech geek, but he actually got how to make the site useful. He was a psychology
Right.
major. Most of the people watching us, they're watching us over computer. Something has to be done to make the content appealing. So people who grasp psychology in ways which machines and computers cannot, those people will do very well.
You also say that women could do well in this new economy.
We see in higher education, at many levels of education, women doing much, much better, for whatever reason. Some of it's discrimination falling away, but I think there are a lot of factors. I think in this future world, people who test and measure well very early will have a lot of opportunities, because basically computers will pick up their talent in some measurable way. They'll be more invested in them. This is another example of average is over. Other people may be denied the second chance. It's like we'll all have a credit score about many different features of our talents.
And the whole idea of being a conscientious worker as well, you say that's one of the reasons women might do well too, because they are often more conscientious workers.
Plausibly, it can be argued that a lot of men, not all,
Right.
have lower levels of conscientiousness, and I think that will continue to be penalized increasingly in the immediate future.
Another change here is the social safety net. If you look at all of the debates going on in Washington, they're really about the size of government and the role that government should play in people's lives. One of the quotes you have in this book, you say, "The forces outlined in this book, especially for labor markets, will force a rewriting of the social contract, even if it is not explicitly recognized as such. We will move from a society based on the pretense that everyone is given an okay standard of living to a society in which people are expected to fend for themselves much more than they do now." And I mean, so what will that mean for people and how they live?
Well, this is what I think we should do with government. We should spend more on young people and poor people, and less on wealthy people, and less on the elderly overall. But I don't see that happening. If anything, we're moving in the opposite direction. So people at an individual level will have to make a lot of adjustments of their own, such as moving to cheaper, lower rent areas. I could imagine a kind of ideal economic plan where you have much better, more rigorous K through 12 education, you deregulate building. I just don't see that we're going to do all these things.
And partly because of our politics.
Absolutely.
And so where are you on the sort of scale of politics? You consider yourself more libertarian?
Small L libertarian,
Okay.
I would say. Flexible libertarian.
Okay. Talking to Tyler Cohen here about his new book, Average is Over, and the future we might see. I want to turn again to the whole idea of sabermetrics. What will that mean in terms of how we live? We'll be judged, it seems, but also we might have the ability to judge other people pretty easily.
Sabermetrics was a revolution that came to baseball a while ago, where you get very good numbers on each player and you get a much better sense of who's producing and who's not.
Right.
I see this spreading to every part of the economy, to education, to doctors, to lawyers, to bloggers who work for the Washington Post.
Everyone will have a Yelp review.
Everyone will have a yield
Yeah.
review on a really second-by-second basis. And people who are productive will do a lot better, they'll earn more, but we will experience this semi-meritocracy as actually somewhat psychologically oppressive.
And in terms of our sort of sense of happiness, what will that look like? Will it be kind of a grand downsizing of our expectations of what happiness looks like?
Well, when so many aspects of our performance are measured, we have a lot of our failures just pushed into our faces. But I think in other ways, this newer world, in some ways, will be happier. We see tolerance going up, we see crime going down, there's a lot more free culture, entertainment.
Which to me was, you talk about this at the end of the book. You say even though there'll be this growing income inequality and gap between the rich and the poor, that there'll also be sort of domestic peace and will be a more conservative society, you say, which is an exact opposite argument that you hear people like President Obama making, for instance. He has said that this growing a gap between the rich and the poor could lead to social and racial stratification and strife.
Inequality in this country has been going up since the early 1980s. Crime rates consistently have gone down, murder rates have gone down, cities have become nicer. We're becoming an older society, all the more so in the future. I think it will be remarkably peaceful.
And so I couldn't tell during this book whether I should be happy or terrified. I didn't know if you were a pessimist or an optimist. I think the end chapters where you essentially forecast a future where some people will be living in what you call shanty towns, that was certainly a dystopic future.
I think this future will be a mix of utopian and dystopian elements. There's so many books written on inequality, and they tend to be explicitly political. But I think at this point, the one radical thing you can do is write a book about inequality and try to keep value judgments to a minimum and lay out the roadmap. And let's just think through. And I think when you do that, you actually can see more of both the good and the bad side. And that's what I tried to do.
And so who wins politically in this new future? The kind of national candidate, what would they have to do and what would they tap into to be successful?
I think when what we now call the 1% becomes the 15% and then the 20%, they'll have all the more influence. And I foresee a coalition between a lot of the wealthy and a lot of the elderly to protect the benefits of the elderly and mobilize the people who actually vote to elect more or less status quo candidates. So for better or worse.
Right, so the status quo. So what was interesting about this is that you aren't making any value judgments about whether or not this is actually good or bad.
Well, I'm inviting readers to make their own judgments, but I just like to think it through more thoroughly, more analytically than we've done to date.
And is there something that could happen that could change the future you lay out here that's very computer-based, that's very stratified?
The future I lay out, it's based on two key trends. One is automation and smart software. The other is globalization. I think, say, for the next 20 years, those two things will continue. Is it possible they don't? Could there be a major war? Could an asteroid hit the Earth? Could there be some other new technology none of us have foreseen? Of course.
Yeah.
But this is my most likely scenario.
And it partly is that computers are getting much more smarter, and their processors are getting faster, and they are sort of leveling the playing field in some ways, and making it a reality that you have all the information you could need at the touch of a button.
Driverless cars actually work. It's amazing, but true.
Yeah. So what about the Jetsons? Are we going to have flying cars?
I don't think that the flying is a big advantage, and it's a lot more dangerous.
But it's
and if you
cooler.
don't have to drive, you don't need to fly.
Right. Tyler Cohen, thank you so much. Good luck with this book.
Thank you very much.
That's our show for today. I want to thank my guest, Michelle Borstein, economist and author Tyler Cohen, Columbine High School Principal Frank DeAngelis. Remember to continue this conversation on Twitter using @background and the hashtag postback. We'll see you back here tomorrow.